Well, welcome to this talk, and we're delighted to welcome back Professor Norman Fenton. Norman, thank you for joining us again. Always a pleasure.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
And today we want to talk about this data from Canada, I believe, Norman, the excess deaths in Canada, which we did mention on a video a few days ago, and you were kind enough to give some expert advice on.
Yeah.
So if we have a look at this graphic now, perhaps you can tell us what it's basically about. So what are we looking at here, Norman? This is the Canadian excess deaths data for Canada for 2022.
Yeah, so in fact, this is from the official an official Canadian website. I need to say something more about the limitations of the data that's on that website, but we'll take this at face value. The thing is here, what exactly do we mean by excess deaths? A lot of people have a kind of like a not terribly clear understanding of what that is, because it's actually really complex to know what to actually measure what excess deaths really are, because you have to know what constitutes the normal range of deaths in any given period that you're looking at. So here they're plotting, this is supposed to be plotting excess deaths in each week of 2022. But how do we know what the normal expected deaths are? Now, typically, the normal range, or the baseline, as they sometimes call it.
This is the lower blue line, the light blue line, Norman, is it?
Yeah, so that will be determined by looking at, let's say, a number of the most recent previous normal years. Sometimes it's 5, sometimes it's 10. So you'll have those. So for each week, you'll have, let's say, 5 or 10 years of previous of the number of deaths in that particular week, because obviously you've got seasonal changes. And what they'll then do is they'll use some statistical methods, not only to do things like adjust for population changes over the years, but also to come up with a range, a so-called, they usually use a 95% confidence interval range, because instead of giving a single value, they'll give a range. Now here, interestingly enough, they've only given the, so there's a 95% confidence interval, which in lay terms, although this is not strictly true, this will be the range between which we're 95%, let's say, confident that the normal figure should appear within that range.
And that's the red dotted line, Norman, is it?
So the red dotted line here is the upper 90. So that's the upper 95% percentile. What they don't show here is the lower percentile, right? But what they do is show the expected one, which is the one in the middle. It's normally in the middle between the lower and the upper. So they don't show the lower range here. They only show the upper range and the expected value, which is the mean of that, of whatever distribution they fit to this. So that's the average number. So the whole point is, why do they only show? It's sensible that they only show the upper value here, because what it's saying, that we're only interested really in whether, if it goes above that, then we should be pretty confident, like 95% confident, that something really above the average is happening, above the normal is happening.
But it's nearly all year, Norman, isn't it?
It's only, in fact, it's only the 22nd of January where it's above the average. There's only 1 week where it's above the average, and there's only that period
when it's below the average. It's above the average all year, isn't it?
So it's above the average all year, sorry, but there's the only period where it's not above the upper percentile is a few number of weeks in the winter there.
Got you.
So that means we can be pretty confident that all throughout the year, except for maybe a couple of weeks, we've got this quite significant excess deaths. And if you look at the peak there, the only time it's below it, I said January. I think because I find it hard to see it here, it's around March time. There was a severe. But if you look at that peak, for example, in January, we don't have to worry about what's the reason for this. There's something unusual is happening here, whether it's the Omicron or whether it's the whatever whether it's some medical interventions or lockdowns which are causing these excess deaths. We don't know. But if you look at that January figure, for example, then what it tells you is that I'm just looking at it tells you that there were at least 1,751 excess deaths that's the difference between the minimum observed and the expected. While it's almost certain that there are at least 1,438, because that's the difference between the minimum observed and the maximum expected. Now, sorry, the one thing I didn't make clear here is actually the value of the observed, which is the I mean that's the
dark blue.
Yeah, because I'm colorblind. Yeah, the actual observed. They call that in itself is not an actual observation. That's also what they call a 95. That's also a 9. That's also the lower 95% prediction for the adjusted observed number of deaths. So what they're saying is we're not. So they're not even absolute. Then what they're saying is we can't be absolutely sure what the actual number of deaths were, right? So that we also have to give that as a distribution, and by giving the lower percentile of that distribution, they mean that we can be confident that it's at least this number. So again, that's also a kind of a minimum of the actual number of observed. So
can I just clarify my understanding so far then, Norman? This top line here, the dark blue line, that's the minimum number of deaths that actually died in terms of people dying.
Yeah, because that's they're saying we're also not sure exactly what that is because we have to adjust that. Although I think there's something wrong there. I think they should be any adjustments about the uncertainty should be made on the other distribution, but for some reason they say they have to make this this adjustment. But you can take it that's the least number of actually that they're pretty confident that the actual number of observed deaths is at least that number.
So anytime this dark blue line is above the light blue line at the bottom here,
then it's above the average expected.
It's probable that there's more deaths.
Yeah, and if it's
anytime the dark blue line is above the red line, it's almost certain that there's
exactly that's it. Yeah, sorry, I was a bit getting a bit confusing there, but that's it. That's basically it.
Well, that's quite a frightening graphic in that case, Norman. Now you've illuminated that. It
is. But what's interesting is that there's a colleague called David Dixon, who runs his own detailed analysis of the Canadian data, and he looks much more closely at this, and he says that in actual fact this data misses two main provinces, namely Ontario and Quebec. And if you and he's looked at the excess deaths, which include the full range of the data. So we're no longer looking at confidence intervals or anything like that. He's just taking the average values here. So what you can see is that he's taken the average values, the average excess death values over a 10-year period. So he looks at 2000, if you look at 2018, 2019, right? There were no COVID deaths here. So these are non-COVID deaths. The orange are the non-COVID excess deaths, and the grey or whatever colour that is are the overall, the all-cause deaths. So of course, 2018-19, there were no COVID deaths. So any excess deaths were just, there were no
just excess deaths. So they were the same.
Just excess deaths. So they're the same there. So in 2018-19, you can see there were a few more. I'm trying hard to find it. What was it? There's about 22,000, just about 22,000 in each of 2018-19. More than, let's say, were the average in the previous 8 or so years. But look what happens in 2020, 2021 and 2022.
Well, it's dramatic, Norman, isn't it? Dramatic increases.
It is, because while in 2021, quite a lot of the excess deaths were due to COVID, there are still a lot of others which weren't, which were some... there's an increase in the other non-COVID excess deaths. And that goes up and up quite dramatically in 2021 and 2022.
So 2021, we're actually looking at, I can see that's 34,276 non-COVID excess deaths.
Yeah.
And 2022, it's 55,991 non-COVID excess deaths. Exactly.
And people who say, well, maybe there might be some necessary adjustments to the population, but given... Look at the 2018, 2019. They were above the previous year's average, but not by that much. And they were pretty much the same. It was pretty stable there. And then suddenly you've got these jumps from, going up ever upwards from 2020 onwards.
So that graphic's telling me, Norman, we've definitely got an excess in non-COVID deaths. resulting in a huge overall increase in excess deaths when we combine the deaths that we could argue about the deaths, how attributable they are to COVID or not, whether they're just mentioned on the death certificate. But ignoring that, we've got a
Exactly.
big
Even ignoring
increase
that,
in excess deaths. How should we go about investigating this?
I don't know. And remember, indeed, as you mentioned there, the COVID deaths are with COVID, not because of COVID. So lots
Yeah.
of those won't be directly caused by COVID. So this is yet another. I mean, we're seeing this in the UK as well. I mean,
Yeah.
we've got a very similar pattern there, and yeah, this is a problem.
I mean, could this be one factor that's causing the excess deaths, or do you suspect it's multiple factors, or what should we, I
Well,
mean,
we've got the well-known medical intervention, which doesn't seem to have been as safe and as effective as claimed. You know, we've got the impact of the lockdowns, and of course all of the the missed appointments, cancer screening, all that sort of stuff. So yeah, that there are those yeah those would seem to be the obvious explanations for those excess deaths.
whatever the explanation is, I think you and me can agree that this needs investigated in Canada and the United Kingdom and indeed other countries around the world as a matter of urgency. These aren't numbers on a graph. These are people's lives, aren't they?
They are, and it does seem curious that given the kind of like the hysteria that was surrounded the excess deaths due to COVID in 2020, or claimed to be COVID, when actually now seeing actually a much higher number of excess deaths which are non-COVID. So, if the governments were so worried about those COVID, the excess deaths due to COVID, why aren't they even more worried about these non-COVID excess deaths that we're seeing now?
And I'm not hearing a thing about these excess deaths in media. If you're watching in Canada, do leave us comments, please, about the degree to which this is being covered by mainstream media. But in the United Kingdom, I can't see virtually nothing in mainstream media, I would say, Norman. Would you agree with that?
There's, I think that's fair to say. Yeah, it's not been discovered. Well, actually, that's not strictly true because I think if you scroll down in the article, I picked up one of the few where you do see some information about where there's some media about excess deaths. Yeah, you can see this thing here.
Oh yeah,
So,
the Daily Mirror.
so there was an article, in the Daily Mirror where Brits are dying in their tens of thousands, and we don't know why. And there's of course no mention about the possible explanation of the well-known medical intervention. But there is mention. There's a Professor Coleman quoted there, and he's one of these who doesn't seem to understand why, but he does offer he offers some potential reasons for the excess death spikes. He says that Britain's getting older and gaining a larger average body mass index. So apparently, according to him, a possible explanation for this sudden increase in excess deaths since the start of 2021 are, suddenly people have got much older very quickly and are gaining, getting fatter very quickly. I don't know why.
I would have thought increase in age was a linear process that happened at a standardised rate.
Well, exactly. You would think that. So,
I mean, this is what's really bemusing about this. Some of the explanations, in inverted commas, that we've been hearing about are so patently absurd.
it is, but this is it. This is you. So this is what you see. If you see it at all, you see this completely it's baffling. What can possibly be doing this? Is it maybe climate change has been offered as a sudden? It's another explanation. I think I've even seen explanations like people not taking their statins and stuff like that. I mean, we've got this sudden. Yeah, it's really curious, isn't it?
Really is quite interesting, and I'm sensing your frustration, Norman, because it's the same as mine. Why isn't this being investigated as a matter of absolute international urgency?
It should be, and I don't know why, and I don't know why those who are talking about it and presenting feasible explanations are being censored for doing so.
Indeed, and yet explanations which are less than rational are being published.
Yep, of course, because that wouldn't challenge the narrative.
Indeed. Professor, as always, enlightening. Thank you very much. Links to your Substack, is that publicly available in the public domain?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So it's where are the where are the numbers? It's where are the numbers.substack.com.
Yeah, well, we'll post that, and your YouTube channel's available as well. For people to watch more enlightening, numerical, empirical truths. Yeah. Professor, thank you as always. Great to talk.
Thanks.